Okay, thanks for tuning in again, and in today's session we'll be looking at risk assessment. Once again, this session is suitable for someone who's looking to take the ISC2 CC exam or the CompTIA Security Plus exam. I'm Benjamin, and let's get started. Alright, when we look at risk, there's actually three elements that will affect the level of risk: threat, vulnerability, as well as impact. So risk is actually the likelihood of a negative event happening. When we look at risk, it's normally a negative event. We wouldn't, really take a look at positive events. And let's take a look at what are threats. So for example, a threat could be, let's say a burglary, if you are looking at physical security. A threat could also be something like, ransomware being deployed in our environment. And in order for the threat to actually take hold in the environment, we would actually need to have a vulnerability. And so for the case of the burglary, the vulnerability could be something like an unlocked door. That gives the opportunity for the threat actor, which is the burglar, to enter the premises. And for ransomware, the vulnerability could be something such as phishing. And this is the vector by which the threat actor manages to get a foothold or get into the environment, get access to the machines and deploy their ransomware payload. And finally, we look at impact. For impact, most of the time, the assets actually define the impact. And so we have to look at what are the assets that are affected. So again, for burglary, most of the time what we will lose is, valuables that were stored on the premises. And so, there's that financial impact because of the loss of valuables. And for ransomware, the impact could be, a loss of availability. And that's because, all the documents that you have stored on the desktop are now encrypted, and you cannot conduct your regular business because you don't have access to these documents. And so that's what sums up, threat, vulnerability, as well as impact. But not to fear, because that there's such things known as controls, which can actually mitigate vulnerabilities and actually lower impact. So if we look at what are some of the controls that are available, so let's say for example our unlock door again. So for our unlock door, so one of the controls that's available to us is those auto locking devices that you see in many corporate premises. And basically, you need to tap a card to go in, and once the door is locked, there's a magnetic lock which which will automatically engage, so it would not allow anybody to actually come in. Yeah, and you don't have to manually lock the door itself. So that's one way that we can counter the locking. Another way of countering phishing is actually we can put in place technical controls such as email scanning devices, which will actually scan your attachments for any exploit or malicious content in it. And of course, not to forget employee training as well, to teach employees what is safe, what is not safe to actually click on and then to open. Yeah. And finally, how can we use controls to actually lower our impact? So if we look at the loss of valuables, one way of lowering the impact is to store it maybe in a safe, so that even if a burglar managed to enter the premises, they will still not be able to get to the valuables, or it could even be stored off premises into a bank. Yeah, and this is something that we'll look at in the next session. This is more of risk transference. We transfer the risk into the bank to help us to manage that risk. Of course, lowering impact also works for phishing. So one of the things that best practices recommend is that we always store our documents in the cloud. And so if the endpoints are actually impacted, they will not actually result in any loss of availability, because we still have a copy of these documents in the cloud. Okay, so let's quickly take a look at some of the questions to test our understanding of these concepts. 1. Which of the following best describes the purpose of risk assessment? Okay, so if we look at assigning a monetary value to potential losses, this is more the assets side of things. We want to know what are the impact, the assets and the impact. Ranking risk based on likelihood and impact. We haven't really spoke about ranking risks, and in future we will look at this. Basically, there are many ways of ranking. There is qualitative ranking as well as a quantitative ranking. discovering assets, threats, and vulnerabilities, and this is what we spoke about, earlier in the previous slide, and we are looking at, what are the three components that make up risks, and these are the three components. So this would be the answer for question 1. Implementing controls to reduce risk. So this is more towards the risk mitigation side of things, which we haven't even spoken about, because now we are assessing the risk. We haven't even looked into mitigating the risk yet. Okay, so let's move to question 2. Question 2. Which of the following is an example of a vulnerability? A phishing campaign targeting employees. So this would be the threat itself, because the phishing campaign is actually propagated by the threat actor. B. A lack of security awareness training. And yep, this would be our vulnerability here. Because this is the threat and this is the vulnerability that exists to allow the threat to take hold in our environment. So if we have good security training, even if a phishing target were to target us, we would not get compromised. And so, a threat requires a vulnerability to exist, to take hold in the environment. An attacker exploiting stolen credentials. This is also a threat. So, obviously the vulnerability itself would be the stolen credential, would be the leaked or stolen credentials, and if those credentials were not stolen, the attacker would not have the opportunity, causing reputational damage. And this is more towards the side of the impact and the impact and the assets that were impacted. Yeah. So for this question, it should be B. Question 3. Which of the following best describes an asset during risk assessment? Okay, so the first option, we have a weakness that could be exploited by an attacker, and this is a vulnerability, not an asset. Option B, anything of value that must be protected by the organization, and yes, indeed, this is the asset. So in the previous example that we used, the asset was the valuables that the burglar actually stole, as well as all the documents that were on the system that were encrypted and they were encrypted by the ransomware, causing a loss of availability. So all these are things of values that must be protected by the organization. Option C, a method used to reduce the likelihood of an attack. I would say this falls under controls, since we can reduce the likelihood. And D, an event that could cause harm to a system, and this is a threat. We've looked at all the various threats that could happen. A burglary, as well as a ransomware deployment, and these are the threats. So for this particular question, the answer should be B. Question 4. An attacker launches a ransomware campaign against an organization. The organization's file servers are unpatched, allowing malware to spread. Which of the following is the vulnerability? Okay, so the ransomware campaign is the threat, is propagated by the threat actor. The file servers itself, these are the assets, because the file servers are storing all the important documents. The lack of patching on the file servers, yes, indeed, this is the vulnerability itself. This allows the attacker to actually get in. And if the file servers were patched, the ransomware campaign wouldn't be successful. And the potential loss of data availability is the risk that we are looking at. Yeah. So for this question, the answer should be a C. Question 5. During risk assessment, which of the following best represents impact? The probability that a threat will occur. So when we see the keyword probability, this is always pointing towards risk. The existence of an exploit in the wild. I would say this would be the threat, since without the exploit, the threat wouldn't exist. If ransomware wasn't invented, then there would be no one who could deploy ransomware. Yeah. C. The potential harm to business operations if a threat is realized. And yep, this is the impact itself. We are looking at the harm, and yeah, it's a potential harm, because we would have to account whether the threat is able to exploit the vulnerability in order for the impact to occur. But the harm itself to asset or to the business operations would be the impact. And lastly, D, the control used to prevent unauthorized access. So this is a control, and it's not the asset. So for this particular question, we are looking at C. Question 6. Which of the following best classified as a control during risk assessment? So an employee falling for a phishing email. This would be a vulnerability, since the employee is fell for the phishing email. Option B, multi-factor authentication on remote access systems. So I would say this would be a control, Basically, we are looking at MFA, which is, you need to have either your phone or you need to have a token or something in order to access the system. And this is done so that, even if the password is leaked, a threat actor will not be able to access the system without that second factor, that phone. And so this is a control that actually reduces the probability of a threat succeeding. A threat actor sending malicious emails. This is the threat itself. A threat actor actually carries out all these threats and all these actions, malicious actions. And finally, customer records stored in a database, and this would be the assets that we are trying to protect. And so for this question, we are looking at B. The MFA is actually the control here. Okay, question 7. Which of the following scenarios best illustrates the relationship between a threat and an asset? Okay, so if we look at weak password accounts on employees' account, and this would be a vulnerability because weak password requirements allow a threat actor to execute what is known as a brute force attack, where they can force or guess all the passwords on employee accounts. So a firewall blocking unauthorized inbound traffic, and this would be a control because the firewall is actually blocking inbound traffic bound for the asset. Malware attempting to encrypt data stored on a file server, and yep, the malware here is the threat, and the data stored on a file server here is the asset. So C is looking likely to be the answer. Annual revenue loss after a data breach, and this is the impact itself. Yeah. So for this question, it will be C. Okay, question 8. During risk assessment, which question is most relevant when determining impact? So option A, how often has this vulnerability been exploited? So I would say this is the intersection between threat as well as vulnerability. I mean, you need someone to actually exploit the vulnerability, and the vulnerability has to have in place, so it's more towards the threat. What safeguards are currently in place? And this would be more of control. We are talking about safeguards which prevent the exploitation of a vulnerability. What would happen to the organization if this asset were compromised? I would say yes, this is a lot of impact here, because we are looking at what's the impact to the organization if this particular threat were to succeed in exploiting the vulnerability. And so the answer here would be C. And how much does it cost to implement additional controls? Yeah, this is really controls, and whether it's worth the cost benefit analysis to actually to implement. Yeah. Alright, that's it for today. I hope that this session has been useful. Do subscribe, and I catch you in later sessions. Thank you.